Namaste, my name is Mansi Shah and I represent the 2.9 million poor self-employed women workers from the informal economy in India, the members of Self-Employed Women's Association SEWA. SEWA is the single largest national trade union in India. We have been organizing informal sector women workers for over 52 years now, and we have a membership of over 2.9 million women who come from over 125 different trades and across 18 states in India. And these women are the poorest of the poor. When I'm talking about the members of SEWA, they are the street vendors, the construction workers, the agricultural laborers, home-based workers, and so on and so forth. Majority of whom are semi-literate or illiterate and unregistered, leaving them outside the purview of the government schemes and subsidies. But more about our work. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Atosa Soltani, and I'm a longtime forest activist. I've dedicated the last 34 years working with Indigenous peoples on the front lines of the fight to protect the Amazon rainforest. I founded an organization called Amazon Watch, and I still serve as the president. And now I am the global navigator for an alliance of 30 Indigenous nations who occupy an area the size of Italy in the headwaters of the Amazon rainforest in northern Peru. And I also do a lot of work to protect our biosphere, the Amazon rainforest. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I am a young African climate leader. I have different roles, but I will focus more on the Green Generation Initiative, where I am a founder. I am also a commissioner at the Global Commission on the Economics of Water and a commissioner in my country, the Nairobi Rivers Commission, that's restoring the largest river basin in Kenya. And that's all about leadership. And then now with the Green Generation Initiative, we are creating the next generation of leaders across Africa that are conscious about the environment. And basically, we're doing this through on-ground solutions that are focused on restoration, regenerative agriculture, and also a huge focus on decarbonization, because we believe that it's through solutions that we're going to transform the future of our planet. Thank you.
Yape, Chante Washte Nape Chuzapalo. To all of my relatives in the room working on climate solutions for community, you are all relatives to me, and we're all relatives with one another as we share this one world. And as we're listening to all of the work that we're doing, protecting indigenous communities and protecting communities therein, we are all relatives in this space. I am from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. I'm Hunkpapa Lakota. I'm indigenous on my mother's side, and I'm African American on my father's side. So it's good to be here because we represent everything that our communities hope for, is pushing projects ahead. The Standing Rock Sioux tribe created Sage Development Authority, which I'm the CEO of, to develop, own, manage renewable energy projects that will benefit our community directly. So one of our larger projects is a wind farm project, 235 megawatts. Another project beneath that is a single wind turbine meant to subsidize our communities, our memberships' electricity bills. And then below that, not that there's a hierarchy all of a sudden, right, guys? We've been talking about that all day. EV charging networks, and then solar installations for our schools, for our district buildings, for our Head Start, so that we can actually have some realized savings for those entities to provide more services for our children. So I'm sure we'll get into all of those things. It's good to be here with you.
Thank you. So that was my nod towards the corporate sector. Yes, give them a round of applause, definitely. Now I'd like to continue the rest of the panel as a conversation. So getting into what matters, it's you all. People say that the differences between humans and animals can be tracked to storytelling. That the difference between a human and an animal is that a human can retell a story to its descendants. And at Pyxera, we love some storytelling. So I'd love to go to each of you and have you all share why you do the work that you do. What did you see in your communities that just motivated you to dedicate your life to change?
Thank you. Actually, a very good point you just made about why do we do the work. And as we all know, we are all gathered here working in the area of climate change, and climate change is real and now. And each one of us here would have experienced the impacts of climate change in one way or other, and there must have been one unique experience that each one of us would have had, which would have led us to do the climate action which we are all doing. For us at SEWA, it is the myriad of challenges that our sisters are facing day in and day out. These women, the poorest of the poor women, are disproportionately affected by the impact of climate change. When Ambassador was sharing about the challenges that the Dominican members are facing, I could relate so much, because what we are seeing is that the issues and challenges faced by the poor women workers across the countries of the global south are very much similar. If we talk about our country, over the past 2 to 3 years, I mean, just after COVID, I mean, climate change has been coming on and on, but in just past 2 to 3 years post COVID, it has just accelerated. We have been facing more. The state where I come from, Gujarat, we have been facing more than 3 climate shocks every year. We have been having extreme heat waves where temperatures have crossed 52 degrees Celsius. Just as the heat waves are receding, we have excessive rainfalls which lead to flash flooding. And then we have unseasonal rains and pest attacks and a lot more things which keep on again and again destroying the lives and livelihoods of our members. We just did a small internal study with over 1,500 members of SEWA to understand the impact of climate on their lives and livelihood. And what we saw that 90% of the members have noted that their livelihoods have been affected by the climate shocks, leading to a reduction in their income by as much as 50%. 74% of the children have noted have shared that their education has been impacted. 80% of the women have, and especially the rural women, have difficulty in accessing water for drinking as well as water for irrigation, because agriculture, India is an agrarian country and agriculture is one of our major occupation. 68% of the women have shared that food security has been impacted. And when you talk about impact on livelihood, impact on food security, impact on access to water, access to energy, issues and challenges in the life of the women are always interconnected, and therefore it has a direct impact on their health, it has a direct impact on their mental health, and it has a direct impact on increase in gender-based violence, in reduction in income, reduction in food, access to food. This has led to impact on health, and when health is impacted, the increase in health cost, again, it's like a vicious circle. It goes on and on, pulling these women deeper and deeper into the vicious circle of debt and poverty. So these are the challenges. SEWA has been organizing women for full employment and self-reliance for over 50 years now. And these increasingly frequent climate and market shocks, they are pulling these women back into the debt and poverty. And that is why we have launched the Building Cleaner Skies campaign, about on the 50th anniversary of SEWA, that focuses on what is climate change, how it is impacting the lives and livelihoods of our members, and what are the locally and women-led adaptation and mitigation solutions that we can promote and help these women strengthen so that they can build their own and their families and their tiny and micro entrepreneurial climate resilience.
Thank you, and congratulations on 50 years. Yes. Tosa, the same question to you. How and why do you do what you do?
Well, I'll disclose that I was born in Tehran, Iran, and there was a revolution when I was 13. And one day I was basically on a plane on the way to Akron, Ohio, to live with my uncle, because there was no certainty that there was going to be education for women. My parents were worried about our future. There was going to be maybe a war. There was already, a lot of this, basically civil unrest and violence. And so I ended up in Akron, Ohio, and definitely the only person of any ethnicity in my school, and so fast forward to college. I my first week, so I felt very, you could say, out of place, like I didn't belong. And from the time I was 13 till I started college, I didn't feel like I belonged. And one day, my first week in college, university, I got the Gaia hypothesis booklet, the James Lovelock hypothesis about Gaia, the living earth. And I think some big light bulb went in my head, like literally our political boundaries are irrelevant when you think about Gaia, a living earth that has maintained conditions conducive for life for 4 billion years nearly, and we've created these constructs of borders and have really created a lot of self-imposed limitations of who we are as species. And so it started my exploration about the earth system and started learning about the rainforest. And once I learned about the rainforest, I couldn't get that out of my mind. Some people thought I was going crazy because I kept having the same dream that I was in the rainforest. And so it took about 8 years. Finally, one of my a man who later became a real mentor to me, said, "We're really sick of you talking about the rainforest." So we called up Randy Hayes at the Rainforest Action Network, and you got 30 minutes with him tomorrow. And so basically I was delivered to my destiny by a mentor, and I never looked back. It just became, I went to the Amazon. I felt like I had literally tuned into the radio dial. At the time in the 80s, there was a lot of fires like today, like it was in the headlines. The burning of the planet's life support systems just really affected me and gave me a real, I said yes. I said yes to this idea of doing this work. And of course, I had been, in love with forests and with indigenous peoples in my own country. When I was 11, I'd spent time in the cloud forests of northern Iran, and I just had that connection. I felt a connection. I felt alive. I felt finally I knew who I was, that I was a cell in the body of Gaia. I was an agent for Gaia. I wasn't necessarily just where I was born or who I was as my culture. So I went for deep ecology as my, my true north. And once I started down the path of working with indigenous peoples, I realized I wasn't there to save the Amazon. The Amazon is here to save us, and that the indigenous people aren't necessarily looking for our support, but they're really here to guide us, to be beacons of light and how we get ourselves out of the labyrinth that only 500 years we got ourselves into, which is really about supremacy, human supremacy, domination of nature, domination of each other, human supremacy, and versus sacred reciprocity with the web of life. And that's what we really needed to do, is shift our worldview to how we see the earth, and see the earth the way indigenous peoples are teaching us to see the earth, which is that she's our mother. Gaia is alive, the earth is a living system, and that really we are here to be good ancestors to future generations. And that became kind of my own exploration of in it's been my privilege to do this work and honor to be receiving all of this wisdom and being there as an ally, a long-term ally to indigenous peoples who put their lives on the line every day. As you hear, communities marginalized, communities who may have very little material wealth, but are rich in language and culture and cosmology and landscapes and trees and forests, rivers, watersheds, redefining wealth and redefining what it means to be human. It's kind of motivated me to do the work I do. So thank you for that question.
I had a beautiful childhood in the woods because I grew up in Kenya's most forested region. And for me as a child, it was about the clean streams that were flowing next to my homestead. It was about the beautiful trees that were supporting, the clean air and everything that we knew also as a community. And I believe in that process, I got to love nature. And in the process, I also got to understand the value that nature brings to us as humans. And in the process, at the age of 7, I got to plant my first tree at the age of 7. And this was at a time when the first African woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize for protecting the environment, the late Professor Nanavaty, was a member of parliament in my home region. So she really inspired the work that I was doing. And I really wanted to understand more about the environment, more about climate issues. But also one interesting thing happened along the way when I got back to this beautiful forest where I planted my first tree, and there were tree logs, there were tree stumps, and I was so frustrated because I couldn't understand why anybody would destroy a beautiful forest that I've known having all grown like the whole time. And what sparked me was not even the frustration, it's the fact that I really had a hunger to do something about it. But I didn't really know what was this thing that I was going to do about this deforestation. And I think for me, that's where many times we get stuck at. We are faced with so many challenges, we're frustrated, we feel helpless, but we don't take the next step to take action and do something about it. So I decided to take the next step and do something about it. And of course, along the way, a lot of the work that I have continued to do has been basically on the basis of seeing opportunities even in the greatest challenge. That even when our communities are being affected by the impacts of climate change, there is a story of resilience in that community, that communities are stepping up and finding solutions by themselves on how they can be able to continue supporting their livelihoods and their communities. And I founded the Green Generation Initiative because I wanted to also nurture more young people to grow up in the same ways, because I believe when you also nurture a child when they're still young, they grow up in the same ways all the way until they are grown. And it's not difficult to actually, you can't really change the way they think once they've grown up with that value and with that passion the whole way. And I think for me was to be able to create that generation, because when I look back, I'm inspired by what I grew up knowing and the values that I acquired about the value of nature, and how when we destroy nature, we are also destroying ourselves. And of course, experiencing the impacts of climate change, seeing women in communities, for example, in Northeastern in my country, having to walk long distances to look for water, to look for food for their families. And for me, that is a challenge, but it's also a story of resilience, that they actually are not sitting there, but they have to walk and look for resources and for water and food for their families. And I really wanted to understand more about what is it that I can be able to do more as a young person. I may not have the capacity that's required to address this whole big problem, but what is that one thing that I can be able to do? And of course, I also educated myself, and I went to campus to actually pursue a course that I was truly believing in, and that was a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and community development. And I think for me this was a turning point, because I got more and more understanding about the issues and how much connected they were: biodiversity, climate issues, water issues, that if we do not address, if we are not really careful about how we treat our planet, then we're affecting our own well-being as humanity. And I think that for me was an issue that I really carried through and continued to champion, both at the local level by driving solutions, but also on the global stage, because I discovered that the work we do in our communities is not gonna be enough if the global collective action is not taken up. Everybody has got a role to play. We're driving action on the ground, but we're going to need collective action. We're going to need businesses, corporations, governments. Everybody is going to need to step up for us to be able to protect our planet in the way it's supposed to be. And so the Green Generation Initiative, we started by simple steps of looking at institutions in Kenya, and especially the public schools, where we realized that the children did not have adequate green spaces. And they had to move to long distances to pay park fees to be able to see a forest. And having grown up seeing forests everywhere, I thought to myself, why can't we have green spaces in these school compounds? And we began with one seed, and they became thousands of tree seedlings. And right now we have more than 300 schools where we've been able to create urban green spaces within their own school compounds. And these are parks that have two perspectives. One, the children are really the most affected when it comes to climate change impacts, because the aspect of food security, they are the ones that have to go a day without a meal in their school compounds as well. Again, they go back home. If there's a drought, again, they don't have enough food. So we thought to ourselves, with this project of being able to create the urban green spaces, we incorporated the aspect of the food forest. So they're able to grow their own food in their own school compounds, and they're also able to green their institutions. And of course, along the way, there were a lot of challenges. The fact that these schools also have an over-reliance on wood fuel. So again, in the face of a challenge, there is an opportunity to make a difference. So we incorporated the aspect of clean energy solutions for the schools, because it's one thing to tell communities to stop doing something, but you cannot tell them to stop if you're not giving them an alternative solution. So our projects are purely based on providing an alternative solution for communities, and an aspect that also has the triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and prosperity, that we're doing this with the communities, we're doing this as a community, and for us to be able to succeed on it, we need that triple bottom line approach. And I think for us, that is what has enabled us to continue doing more. And along the way, also with the aspect of noticing that there was not so much action happening on the global scale, we now started to bring the connections between how local actions actually contribute to the global, impacts, and how the global lack of inaction as well affect our work at the local level. And so we started now in terms of youth movement building across the African continent. And so far, the youth movement building is actually an accelerator program that's looking to scale up solutions of young people, because Africa is a very young continent. And the beauty about the young continent is the fact that the young people are driving solutions at the local level, looking at key issues, energy, agriculture, food systems, all these aspects. There are solutions on the ground, but we are not scaling these solutions because we're actually not short of solutions. We have so much solutions. We have all the technology we need. We have all the information. We just need to look and invest in the right places and make sure that we are scaling these solutions to the next level. And of course, this program now has enabled us to support more young people to influence policy, because when we address solutions at the local level, we make an impact. And now our collective impact gives us higher bargaining power when we come to influence policy at the global stage, because we are able to demonstrate the action we have done, and then we're able to call for more solutions. We're able to call for more action to be taken up by leaders, to be taken up by decision makers. And that has also given us opportunity to be able to also engage with our governments in a way that we can be able to also influence decisions in a bigger scale. Thank you.
As I personally look back on my journey, to be in the position that I'm in now, I think the time when I moved back home, I started to go back to schools and, begin my educational process. And not soon after that, my brother became chairman at Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and he asked me, he said, "Joe, you have a lot of things that you're thinking about in our community, and what is it that you can do, to be a part of this thing?" And he really inspired me to run for council at that time. And so I had already worked in a space of introducing myself to folks, through the job that we had there at the casino, which you met everybody at the tribe. Everybody came to the casino and outside of the casino. So it was a really good place for me to have a jump off point. And so what I decided to do at that point, I said, I need to go to everyone's home from north to south and visit everybody where they are and have this conversation. What is important to you? And what is important to us as a nation? What is important to our children as a nation? And from that point, I see my relatives in such despair at times, grandmothers raising grandchildren, the generation gap, the poverty rate. We're roughly 40% poverty rate at Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Not to promote poverty, but it's a situation, 50% unemployment. Because when you look at what Native nations have had to endure with the United States and other places, like we were just talking about in the Amazon, is the encroachment upon those governments to take the resources and then remove the people and force them into dependency. And that's what happens to all of the Native nations here in the United States. When we look at that, we were put into forced dependency, a forced government that was not of our cultural own or our own spirituality. Because before, as we just discussed, and thank you all for so much, is that our spiritual relationship to the earth, has existed for thousands of years. And so now we're looking back at that as we're facing climate disaster, and how do we turn to have a relationship? And people are looking back to indigenous nations to say, how can we move back towards that relationship? So it was very important. And it's like, it set me up as I went through council and got to understand what the governmental system we were working with was made up of. And it was made to keep us in a place. It wasn't made to advance us. So it was very difficult for us to make the strides that we needed to do as a government, but what we could do as a people was vastly different. So let's move that from 2009 through 13. We had put an RFP out to understand what it was for our wind resource, because we knew it was a really windy place. I've gotten sunburn, I've gotten frostbite, but I never had windburn until I moved home back to Standing Rock. It's a real deal thing, which tells you that we had a lot of wind. And so how do we develop that space? So we put an RFP out during my time at council and understood at that point that all these developers wanted to come in and simply buy our pre-development and own the wind farm, and they would simply give us a land lease and a very minor percentage of ownership. And after 25 years, when the flip would occur, we would have more ownership of a depreciated asset at that point that we would have to refit and remobilize. And then where are we going to have the money to do that? So it was a no-win situation, a zero sum. We said that's not for us. That's a bad deal. Better to take no deal than a bad deal. So we stopped. And then a few years later, 2016 comes by, and Dakota Access Pipeline decides to put a oil pipeline through our only water resource at the Missouri River. And if we all remember the Dakota Access Pipeline fight, our children led that fight. Our children ran and said, we need attention to this. We're going to run to Washington, D.C. First, they started with running across the river, then they ran across the state, and then our kids ran across the country to raise awareness for what was occurring, to our only source of water. If there was a pipeline break, we would be decimated. What was very tough about this was that 30 miles north of us is Bismarck, North Dakota, where there's 95% white population. The original pipeline was decided to go there 10 miles north. But a decision was made to protect that population and move it 1 mile north of where we exist, or where my wife and all of her family exist at Cannonball, where they grew up and swam and where our waters come from. And 17 million other people downstream also live. So that sparked in us an idea to say, what are we living with here? Our kids are looking for this decision-making process about how do we move our community forward? How do we protect our interests? How do we protect the water? How do we protect that most basic element, air, water, warmth, earth? And so we move forward with the thought, analyze where we're at. We were paying 14 cents a kilowatt. North, they were paying 8 cents a kilowatt. Instant disparity situation, where at the end of the line, we're forced to pay the most. We need to come up with a solution for that, and that's where we move forward with what we had talked about previously with the wind farm. How do we get into this better situation? And so we had so much attention, so many foundations, and this is the other point of things that occur here in America. If you want to get something done by community, you need philanthropy to do it. If it wasn't for philanthropy, we would not have been able to get the first part of our wind studies really firmed up and mobilized. So we spent some of that philanthropy organizing our space, going through a community development and directed process so that we could take everything we learned and put it into this project that we knew we had great wind assets for. What we told the developers previous to that, it was like, you wouldn't go to Saudi Arabia, put a drill down and go, we're going to give you a land lease. How much wind do we have going through our space? It's just not a good deal. So as we move through this, we move into a space where we're going to pre-develop our asset for equity into the project. And at that time, we were looking at roughly 7 to 10% ownership at that time. IRA rolls along. There's an opportunity in that legislation for tribes to loan capital loan up to 80% of the construction of the project, which now gives us more than 40 to 50% ownership stake. So we've exponentially increased our revenue stream. And it was thankfully for us holding off and trying to increase our pre-feasibility equity asset building process that we're able to hang in there long enough to encounter, a situation where there is more actually coming from the government in this space. Government actually serving people. Who knew that was going to happen? After Trump, we had no idea that that was going to happen. So now we're looking at that situation again, and we're hanging on to the real asset that we have in this space. But every time we get into here, it is holding water with an idea. We should sell to a developer. No, let's keep it ourselves. We are one of the first native nations in the United States to own a wind farm project, to not sell to a developer, to engage in a fee-for-services contract with the top 3 developer, also work with an OEM turbine provider that is going to recycle the blades because we pushed our issue that our kids said was important. Recycle the blades, don't bury the blades. And through the government processes with LPO, those are the other things that we also pushed. We need ownership. We cannot continue down this process and create this and continue the same sordid, same old story of extraction, not at Standing Rock. We went through so much just recently. Dogs. Oh, Lord. These guys were practicing war games on us out there at Standing Rock. It was a tough thing. So we can't take that sacrifice and let it lie and move into the space. So as we move forward and keep holding our water, into this next generation, I think of that as the next generation that's going to inherit our work. I had no idea I would be sitting here holding on to this work, but it's wonderful because it is the relationships that we make and the discussions that we hold and talking about our shared responsibility and our shared dependency on one another, but also the earth and our spiritual relationship to that gives us the gift to give that gift to our next generation.
Thank you for sharing, all 4 of you. I'd like to pivot. So we've talked about a certain kind of obstacle. That is the problem, the reality that's on the ground of the communities you all are serving. But there's another kind of obstacle. That's once you have noticed this challenge, how will you go about changing it? And now, I guess in the private sector, a handout's a handout no matter what. If the government gives you a subsidy, it's always a good thing. But in regards to the private sector and nonprofits, a handout or a simple, here you go, isn't always what's needed. Sometimes you need to look further and figure out what is actually needed in a community and what can I do for that community. So I wanted to hear from each of you, what has been your experience as you navigate your own organizations to receive investment? And this investment will differ depending on the context. And what do you wish investors had in mind while they went about supporting your change?
Before I go directly to your question, I would like to share that what we have seen from our experience working with these women, especially the young generation women, is that climate action, when it is owned, designed, and implemented by the grassroots, it is the most effective climate action. And therefore, instead of us designing programs and initiatives and then asking for investment in for implementing those programs, if it is very important to promote the women-led or the locally led climate action. And what do I mean by this locally led climate action? To give an example, I would like to share a small story about one of our grassroots leader, Meena Ben. Meena Ben comes from a very dry, arid desert region of Kutch district in Gujarat. And this year, actually last year, her district was hit by extreme heat wave, as I was mentioning. And because of the heat wave, there was no water to drink. Now, Kutch district, because being a dry region, their main occupation is animal husbandry. But when they did not have access to water for drinking, how would they give water for the cattle? And therefore, the milk production decreased. They had to sell off their cattle. The entire community was drowning in debts. Also, work on agriculture, little bit fodder growing out, but because there was no water and the community has to work in extreme heat situation. So how do you address this? I mean, also these workers are all daily wage workers. They are small and marginal farmers. So if they don't work, they would not be able to put food on the table. And if they work in this extreme heat situation, then their health would deteriorate. So it's a very difficult situation for these workers. But what we have learned working with women like Meena Ben is that even in these kind of dire situations, women do not lose hope. So Meena Ben started she started mobilizing women, encouraging women to change their dietary patterns, like consume more and more fruits and vegetables, juicy fruits, buttermilk, and things that would cool down the body so that they are not impacted by the heat when they work in the field, because not working is not an option. But immediately she also realized that, this is a very short term solution. It is not a long term solution. And if we want to change the scenario, there is also a need to work on mitigation. And therefore, she and a cadre of young grassroots women like Ina Ben, they trained as climate entrepreneurs. They started going door to door and started conducting energy auditing and budgeting exercises, helping the rural households to understand where they are spending a lot of their resources, time on energy access, and how switching to renewables would not only help in conserving their resources but also in reducing their carbon footprint and thereby mitigating the impact of mitigating climate change. So Meena Ben, with support of SEWA, made a menu of 12 to 13 green solutions which they would offer to each households. It would include solutions like precision irrigation pump, which would cut down the irrigation requirement of water by almost 50%, biogas digesters, cool roof paints, solar lanterns, LED lights, and so on. And they would help the women to adopt and adapt these solutions. Secondly, what Meena Ben did is she also mobilized the women in her community to train as green entrepreneurs. So, because when these green solutions would increase in the villages, how do you service them? How do you repair them? And so she helped these women train as green entrepreneurs. So now they are they are able to not only adopt these solutions, but also have dignified livelihood in repairs and maintenance, and that would cut down on rural out migration. The third thing is, how do you provide a safety net to these women in this climate shocks? So Meena Ben helped design the first ever climate catastrophic insurance that we piloted last year with 20,000 members and scaled it up this year to 50,000 members. It is a parametric insurance, so women do not have to produce a lot of documents to prove the case. The insurance has a preset trigger point. So when the temperatures rise to 43 degrees or whatever is defined, automatically the payment would fall into the bank accounts of the women, and that will help them provide them a safety net so that they don't have to work in extreme heat situations. Just as Meena Ben was recovering from the the state of Gujarat was had to face extreme excessive rainfalls, which led to flash flooding. Meena Ben's cattle got drowned. Her house was demolished because it's a mud house, and the government relief packages were announced, but it is based on surveys. The government will conduct surveys, it will assess what is the kind of damage, and then the relief would be disbursed. The whole process would take 6 to 8 months. Where does Meena Ben live till 6 months? What does she earn? Her cattle has gone away, her cattle has died. So, again, with support of member SEWA, and Meena Ben has designed a livelihood recovery and resilience fund. It's a pool of blended finance that provides innovative financing solutions like first loss direct FLDG, interest subvention, and so on. So it will help in women like Meena Ben access relief funds immediately within a period of 15 days. And it's not a grant, because at SEWA, what we've seen is women do not need charity, poor do not need charity. What they need is innovative enabling financing solutions. So when women have access to credit immediately after a climate shock, they are able to stand back, bounce right back on their feet, and build their own resilience. And as their livelihood stabilizes, they repay into this pool. And that is how they are ready for the next disaster. And so, coming to your question, how do you catalyze investment? There is a need to strengthen such women-led, locally led solutions. There is a need for partnerships. Like they have this solution menu, as I said, they have this menu of solutions, green solutions. So this is where private sector technology companies can partner to design, research and design technologies which are adaptable to the unique needs of these poor women. There is a need for researchers, there is a need for academia to come together and actually collect data that can bring out these kind of solutions. And then, of course, the finance, like the loss and damage fund or the green credit fund, these funds should be accessible to the women. Thank you.
Incredibly amazing, inspiring, and the work everyone's on this panel is doing. The Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance was formed about 7 years ago, really around the fact that we realized that 80% of this bioregion, which contains the most biodiverse place on Earth, is at risk. And business as usual scenarios through 2030 meant roads, new pipelines, new dams, oil drilling, mining, legal mines, and also a lot of illegal mines. Just to give you a sense, this area of the rainforest is so biodiverse that in one area the size of a football field, you will have more species, more different kinds of species of trees than in all of the US and Canada combined. So this area is designed for life. In fact, during the last ice age, when the whole continent of the Americas froze over, the headwaters of the Amazon maintained life and repopulated the continent. It's a Pleistocene refuge that when the ice receded, and the animals and the plant species were able to propagate from there. It's the crucible of life. It's also the home of indigenous peoples, still some uncontacted peoples. And yet 80% of this area is threatened by industrial scale resource extraction. A model we know is life blind, this economic model that doesn't distinguish between an ancient forest and a parking lot. I think the indigenous peoples realized they were winning some battles, but they were competing with each other. Someone mentioned that earlier, for attention, for funding. That often the resources that came if there was a crisis, but once the crisis was abated successfully, everyone went away. And that indigenous peoples were continuously being basically threatened also from within, from divisions, from people being bought off by mining companies or oil companies. So about 6 or 7 years ago, there began a series of dialogues about what needed to emerge. And what emerged was indigenous peoples declared each indigenous nation declared their commitment to permanently protect all their intact forests. And we began to see how that was and what it looked like when we did a bioregional plan. And the plan was very holistic. It was based on indigenous vision of living in harmony, being holistic, everything from food systems to land rights to women's empowerment, education, healthcare, all of it. Of course, these communities are left out, although most of the revenues the government gets for resource extraction come from their territories. They're the last in line to get education resources or have access to schools or have access to emergency health care. It costs $500 to get an emergency flight out if you're bitten by a snake or if a woman in labor having complications. So indigenous peoples said, we really need to unite. We are one river basin. If you accept the mine upstream, we're screwed downstream. If you allow the dam downstream, there's no fish upstream. We are one body. We are one integrated whole. So we began to change the paradigm of competition to cooperation and alliance, and that's a concept indigenous people understand. So we have a plan. We began a pilot programs for reforestation and food security and land rights. Of course, we are also fighting battles like every day, legal injunctions against illegal roads, illegal mining, completely fighting the governments on many fronts. But we realize the fights are going to always be there, but really what Indigenous peoples needed is to consolidate their efforts to get resources to the front lines to implement their own life plans. Now, life plans are Indigenous concept of a holistic master plan for the future of your territory and people, based on this idea of good ancestors to future generations. So we began to say we need to support these life plans. Of course, there's a lot of obstacles. What are the obstacles? You know, less than 1% of all climate mitigation, adaptation, climate, resilience, conservation, forest protection dollars get to their Indigenous territories. Less than 1%. In fact, it's like 0.2 of 1%. So we realize that what we really need to do is build portfolios and capacity and have collectively peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer management of resources to the front line. So that's where we are now. We're still very small. Our vision's massive. We're here working to basically, last year, Indigenous peoples decided they were ready to create their own entity, Indigenous-led entity. We've created the largest Indigenous-led organization in the Americas, probably maybe around the world, to receive and channel resources in a transparent way, peer-to-peer, where no one is left out. Of course, we need to raise a lot of money to make sure no one is left out, but it's so inspiring. For very little funding, they're planted trees, doing leadership training, capacity building, using support to bring, basically territorial monitoring. We're talking about 700,000 people who live in an area that is, millions of acres. What we need to see these folks not just as Indigenous communities, but as Indigenous nations who are governing millions of acres of the life support systems of the planet. So I invite you to learn more. There's so much more I could say, but I know time is short and we're standing with you and some drinks out there. But to say that, the Sacred Headwaters Alliance is really inspiring. It's breaking paradigms, creating win-win cooperation, peer-to-peer. Like, how do we raise everyone to basically protect, who's already committed to give their lives to defend the forest? How do we show up as good allies? How do we show up as funders? And trust is a big issue. Indigenous peoples are often seen as, they can't manage the money or it's corruption. But how many people here in the financial sector have seen corruption? I mean, why is it so much harder for Indigenous people to prove their integrity and trustworthiness than it is in the financial sector? So we're helping sort of bridge that divide through collectivism and invite you to learn more about it. We created a video called Amazonia 2041, a vision from the future, where you see the vision of actually having implemented the vision of Indigenous people's life plans and winning the protection of the Amazon.
Thank you.